voicing general disapproval today.
You're like the podcaster that is begrudgingly here. You're not like Jason and I, who are like, we need to be on front of the camera. You're not the podcaster that we want, but you're the podcaster we need.
That's right. But not the one you deserve.
Welcome to VCR, a vintage cinema rewind. We're bringing old movies to new viewers. I'm Blake. I don't know why I thought you were going to say something, but...
Okay.
I just had high expectations for you this episode, and you've already disappointed me.
Okay, sorry. I'm Mike, and I'm here. Jesus.
We're off to a great start. And we're here for our holiday special.
We're here for a Die Hard.
We're doing a Die Hard.
Mm-hmm.
Die Hard, Die Hard, Die Hard.
Ricky Ticky Die Hard.
Yeah, all of that is a Rick and Morty reference, if you don't know what we're talking about.
Yeah, so...
from the most recent season, which was a really great episode.
I feel like I'm going to be talking about that later in the episode.
Cool, looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is our holiday special, so Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, everybody out there, all the listeners. And we've got, debatably, a holiday movie today, which we're probably going to debate later. The 1988 action epic,
Die
Hard.
Epic is a good word for it, actually. Like, I watched this movie on... Like, I watched it when I was a teenager, obviously, but I watched it for the first time in, 10 or 15 years on Wednesday, and I was surprised at the scope of the movie.
I am excited to talk about my relationship to the movie a little bit later then, because you and I think, have different relationships to this, which is interesting. I didn't know that this was your first watch in a while.
Yeah, it's been... Yeah, I mean, I think I went through this phase when I was a teenager where my parents showed me and my sister a bunch of classic 80s movies, like the Rocky movies, the Rambo movies, actually, maybe we just went through a Sylvester Stallone phase. But I do remember watching all the Die Hards with my parents on, Jesus Christ, it might have been VHS on a VCR, wink, wink.
Cool.
But yeah, I watched them probably a couple times as a teenager, and then 12 years went by, and here we are.
Nice. This is an annual watch for me, so I have a very deep connection with this movie.
Okay.
But we'll talk about that later in our personal reviews. Let's get started with the plot, and I'll let you break it down. Okay.
Well, for those precious few of you who have never seen this movie, first of all, just turn us off and go watch it. What are you doing with your life? So, Bruce freaking Willis stars as New York cop John McClane, who is on his way to L.A. to visit his...
Somewhat estranged wife.
Somewhat estranged wife is a good way of putting it. They attend her boss's Christmas party at Nakatomi Plaza, or Nakatomi Tower, which is then overtaken by terrorists, in air quotes, led by the always fantastic Alan Rickman. And John escapes and begins a guerrilla warfare campaign against the, once again, quote-unquote terrorists. So, and I mean, yeah, that's basically it. It's a very simple setup, but it sprawls out in ways you might not have been expecting. Again, this for the few of you who haven't seen it.
Yeah, for sure. This is a absolute classic of action films that had a very massive impact on action films in the 90s and still continues to have an impact on action films today, I would say. And we'll go into much more detail when we get into the spoiler section on how impactful this movie really is.
It's kind of interesting the space this movie holds because it's a classic, right? Mm-hmm. So it's hard to imagine where the action genre or where movies in general were before this movie came out. And I guess just what a kind of gamble this movie was when it was made. So yeah, just looking at the historical context, I didn't realize that at the time this movie came out, the idea of Bruce Willis as an action star was kind of...
questionable.
Preposterous. It kind of reminds me of how you saw Nobody, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the idea of Bob Odenkirk as an action star was kind of funny.
And
then Nobody came out. We're like, okay, he can pull it off.
Let's move into characters and people you may know. Let's plow through this intro bit because we're going to assume that most of the viewers have seen this classic at this point. But this really is hopefully the final push that if you've never seen this film, hopefully we finally get you there, because it is absolutely worth your time.
The holiday classic.
So, characters and people you may know. The first person that we would need to talk about, the central character, our leading man.
Our Adonis.
Yes, John McClane, the New York cop that you mentioned. He is kind of portrayed as an everyman. He's not the typical action movie up until this point in cinema where he's basically indestructible. Like, we see John McClane be very vulnerable throughout the movie. There's even a little bit of self-loathing towards himself either. There's not as much assuredness as some of the action heroes of the prior generation, I would say.
You know what I was thinking watching this movie on Wednesday? Again, putting this movie in its historical context, like the big action stars pre-Bruce Willis were Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone.
Yeah.
Like big, muscle-bound He-Man, Rambo. Rambo 3 came out earlier that year, I think. And, Rambo even has that like massive... the
hair.
Massive perm, right?
Yeah.
And then looking at it nowadays, like we've got like Chris Hemsworth and like Chris Evans.
Pratt.
Yeah, all
the
these
Chris's.
the various Chris's. Yeah. And how they're all like, I mean, I shouldn't say this because I don't want to get sued, but like probably, on some kind of steroids, like 10% body fat, like rippling abs, that sort of thing.
Well, I think it wasn't one of them. It was Rob McGurney, I think, from Always Sunny in Philadelphia, that put a post that was like, like all you need to get like Hollywood jacked is basically like unlimited money and unlimited time. Take some roids, take like
the trainer from the Magic Mike movies.
Yeah, exactly, like all of that, and there's some truth to that, right? Like, to get in that kind of shape, like you do in the time that people have to get in that shape for Hollywood films, you do have to be on maybe a little bit of something, and also have ex-trainers and chefs around you at all times, kind of getting you in that shape. It's unattainable for the person who works the 9 to 5. And really shouldn't be the standard. And that's where Bruce Willis comes in, who's obviously in great shape in this film.
I was thinking, watching this movie, like, he just kind of looks like a guy.
Yeah.
Like a normal guy. Like, he's barrel-chested, and, like, he looks like he can kick your ass, but, like, he just looks like a guy. Like, he's even got, like, a receding hairline. Like, he just, like...
Yeah, and that's a great thing that I was going to mention, is because this is so early in Bruce Willis's career, he actually has hair in this movie.
Yeah, so if you want to see Bruce Willis with hair, look no further. But he just looks like a dude who has a job and a family, who like probably goes to the gym, but like also drinks beer.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Like almost a dad bod.
Yeah, kind of.
But anyway, Bruce Willis, a favorite on this podcast. We've already done an episode centered around him when we did The Fifth Element, which is a pretty good sci-fi film. He's also known for The Sixth Sense, Pulp Fiction, 12 Monkeys, and Looper, all of which I've seen. I'm a massive fan of Bruce Willis, so I've seen most of his filmography pre-like 2010, 2012. For obvious reasons, there's been a lot of direct-to-DVD movies since then, and
kind of tragic in hindsight.
Yeah, tragic in hindsight because of his diagnosis this year with aphasia, or bringing up in the public discourse his diagnosis and retiring from movies. So it's sad, but I'm glad that we had Bruce Willis in films like these where you can return to them time and time again and still find new things, I guess, within the film, because there were things within this watch that I maybe hadn't noticed or focused on before that I actually found really interesting and insightful.
Watching this movie again just earlier this week, like, it's kind of like we just recently did The Jerk, and I mentioned how I was watching Steve Martin, like, wow, like, he's fantastic, right?
Yeah.
I was watching Die Hard, and I had the same reaction to Bruce Willis. I'm like, you're great in this movie. Like, you can really act.
And this is like his personal favorite role as well, John McClane, and that's probably why he jumped into the role at any opportunity that he had. And there was a rumor at one point that they were going to make a sixth movie, but obviously with the issues that he's had the last few years, that he was unable to kind of meet that. Hopefully Hollywood retires the John McClane character along with Bruce Willis, but Hollywood obviously is not known for letting things.
Well, give it 5 years, and we'll have like a AI deep fake Bruce Willis on screen.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
Yeah.
The young John McClane.
Yeah, with a digitally corrected hairline too. 'Cause
Yeah,
everybody has
probably.
to look perfect.
Fun fact for you before we move on from Bruce Willis. He's actually the most German actor
What?
in the film. He was born in West Germany, which is much more German than any of the actual villains in the movie were in real life.
I gotta say, okay, this, you know what? Jumping right ahead, the next big actor we have to talk about is probably Alan Rickman.
Yes, as Hans Gruber.
I was watching Hans Gruber and kind of in my head being like, is Alan Rickman German? That's not a German name.
Alan Rickman, who plays Hans Gruber, one of the greatest villains of all time, was not, in fact, German. He was British.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and you kind of hear that in his voice. Like, I guess the only time where I heard the German accent was when he was speaking German in the few instances that he did during the film. But Hans Gruber, one of the greatest villains of all time, and again, a precursor for what's to come with villains for the next 20, 30 years after this movie.
Absolutely.
The intelligent villain, the villain that you can almost empathize with and you kind of secretly sometimes root for to succeed in his plan. Like, he's very intellectual and everything's planned to the tiniest detail.
I'm always really interested in the relationship between the hero and the villain in any movie, and how they maybe mirror each other or contrast each other or what have you.
I think as a fan of the Batman and the Joker, that's something that fans of that genre are maybe somewhat always paying attention to in the back of their heads.
Kind of, yeah. I almost find, like, in a lot of books or movies, like, the relationship between the hero and the villain is almost more interesting than any other relationship. Like, I'm also a huge fan of anime, right? So, like, the rival stock character,
right?
I'm like, wow, they're so connected. But homoerotic fantasies aside, so I was visiting family this week for a Christmas party, and I ended up rewatching this movie with my mom, appropriately enough, because she's the one. Her and my dad are the ones that showed it to me originally, and she even pointed out herself, like, that John McClane and Hans Gruber are fantastic adversaries.
Yeah,
just in how they're like the polar opposites of each other, and like John is like kind of grubby, working class, just a guy. I wouldn't necessarily say he's smart, but he's clever.
Yeah.
He's
quick-witted.
Quick-witted, yeah, quick on his feet. Whereas Hans Gruber is,
calculated
and measured and polished and like fantastically well dressed for a career criminal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas John is a fantastic improviser. Hans almost seems like a fantastic plotter. Which isn't to say that he doesn't have his moments thinking on his feet, but yeah, no, like I couldn't imagine a better adversary for the John McClane character than Hans Gruber.
Yeah, and you know what? You know what I want to say at this point? In a lot of our previous episodes with really famous actors, we kind of defer to talking about the character by the actor's name. And both Bruce Willis and Alan Rickman really are lost in the character. Like, they become the character, and when I'm watching this movie, I'm not watching Bruce Willis and Alan Rickman. I'm literally watching John McClane and Hans Gruber, and when I'm thinking about this movie, I'm not thinking about the actors, I'm thinking about the characters and the characterizations.
John and Hans, yeah.
And that's just, again, a point to how fantastic this movie and how well acted this movie is.
That's a good point.
And beautifully or spectacularly, this was actually Alan Rickman's first cinematic role. Prior to this, he had been a stage theater actor for a few years at that point. He was in his 40s at the time that this movie was made, and this was his first on-screen appearance. And the role that really put him on the map, right? Like, that voice alone is something that people stopped and paid attention to. And so
even just the name of the character, like Hans Gruber.
Yes.
Like, even the name just sounds like slimy and sinister.
Yes, very sinister. I like that word for that description. And without this movie, we really wouldn't have a lot of really great roles with Alan Rickman. And my examples are Snape from the Harry Potter series and Funny enough, I think Alan Rickman was maybe the only person in the world, apart from J.K. Rowling, who knew where the series was going because it impacted his portrayal, and she told him the ending of the novel before anybody else knew.
Really?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
So we were just talking about this before we started recording. I've actually never read any of the Harry Potter books or seen any of the movies. That's not true. I watched the first one on a date like 8 months ago.
Nice.
I don't really have as much exposure. For people our age, that's probably the role we would most know him for.
Yes, the quintessential role.
The quintessential role. So I didn't really have that relationship with Alan Rickman, but just watching this movie again, same with Bruce Willis, I really have to admire the craft on display.
Yeah, and the other films that you may know him from, in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, he played the Sheriff of Nottingham, which apparently is, again, a role where he really gets lost in the character, and he steals the movie from what I've read online as well.
That's the Kevin Costner movie, right?
Yes, it is
With
the Kevin Costner Robin
famous
Hood.
Bryan Adams song.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
I haven't actually seen the movie myself, but it is something that we actually talked about doing on the podcast earlier this year for our fantasy film. And I think it's something that we'll return to in the next couple of years.
It's interesting. I feel like Alan Rickman was almost born to play like sinister, condescending authority figures.
Yeah,
like
and it really wasn't what he was interested in playing. And yeah, he almost didn't take the role for that reason. But we'll talk about that later.
Okay.
So the other film that you might know him from is the film Galaxy Quest, which is a sci-fi comedy from the 90s.
Oh, yeah.
One that I personally very much love. But unfortunately, we haven't had Alan Rickman in any of our films because he passed away in 2016 of cancer.
Yeah, very sad.
Unfortunately, we do not have him with us anymore. The next character that I want to talk about is Holly Gennaro, who is actually John McClane's estranged wife in the film, who took the job at the Nakatomi Plaza building, moved away from John with the kids, and that's kind of why they're in this estranged relationship, because there's some friction between why she left and whether John approved of her leaving to take a job.
So, not to cut you off, but the one thing I was trying to wrap my head around this morning as I was driving over here is we see the kids briefly at the start of the movie and then for a brief second at one point on TV. So, like, she moved for the job and she took the kids with her, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So, in a sense, like, she didn't really leave. He just didn't follow his own family.
Yeah. That's exactly it.
Okay.
And he kind of explains that early on in the film. He says, like, I'm a New York cop and I had some jobs, some people that I want to put behind bars, and it takes a few months for that stuff to kind of work their way through the system, and I just wanted to be around for that. And he kind of half-ass excuses it and then why he didn't leave.
Then Argyle, his driver, kind of calls him out for saying, "Oh, you just figured it wouldn't work out for her out here, so she'd come crawling back and you wouldn't even have to unpack."
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny because it really doesn't paint a great picture of who John McClane is in those opening 20 minutes of the film.
Yeah, he's definitely
a flawed person.
Yeah, and flawed in a very mundane way too, right? Like, it's not so much like preposterous, it's not Shakespearean, he's just kind of an insensitive jerk.
Yeah.
And, like, we're all insensitive jerks at the end of the day, or at least we've all known plenty of insensitive jerks. Mm-hmm. Like, it's almost there's nothing. I almost kind of admire the movie for having the courage to present kind of a domestic squabble so unglamorously, and it's not like fetishized either. It's just, oh, like, you're just kind of a bad husband right now.
Yeah.
So, like, what do we do?
So getting back to Holly Gennaro,
Right.
though, played by Bonnie Bedelia, another fantastic portrayal of the character. I really can't complain about any portrayals, to be honest, in the film. But Bonnie Bedelia, you might know actually from the TV show Parenthood, a very recent TV show that I believe is wrapped up at this point. She played Camille Braverman in all 103 episodes of the show.
103 episodes?
Yeah.
I don't remember hearing about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So she's still very much relevant in Hollywood. The other character with an actor that I want to quickly mention, Thornburg, the slimy reporter. Who
The best
appears...
character in the movie. Actually, no, the most sinister character in the movie.
Yeah, he appears kind of later in the film once the terrorist acts kind of become known to the outside world, outside of the Nakatomi Plaza. He's played by William Atherton, which you might actually know from Ghostbusters.
That's right, where he plays exactly the same character.
Yeah. Only this time he works for the EPA.
Yeah. I'm going to pretend that those movies take place in the same universe, and it's just the same guy. It's like this guy where everywhere it's almost like Randall Flagg, but in a much more mundane way. He just goes from place to place, making things worse for everyone.
You know, I never put it two and two together that they were the same person.
Basically,
yeah. But they were just like the same actor too.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But yeah, you also might know him from The Last Samurai, a Tom Cruise movie. He played Winchester Rep. I haven't actually seen that movie, so
Saw the end of it.
All I know him.
Saw the end of it 15 years ago.
The last couple of characters, and I'm going to bring them up later, and that's why I want to bring them up now, is Argyle. John McClane's hired limo driver who is sent from the Nakatomi Plaza. Like, the owners of the company decide, because Holly's such an important person in the business, to send her spouse a limo to go pick him up from the airplane. And then because John and Argyle have a good relationship as they drive there, Argyle says, you know, like, I'll wait for you here to see how things go with your wife. And so he sticks around and then has maybe a more important role later on in the film as well. The other character that I wanted to mention was Sergeant Al
Powell?
Yes, Sergeant Al Powell.
Al Powell.
Yeah.
Say that for a second. There's a lot of long L's in that name.
Yeah, that's true.
But I digress.
He plays one of the first responders, one of the first police officers on the scene, and is the person to discover what's happening there and alerts the rest of the police force to have them come and start the whole shebang with the terrorist hostage situation, basically.
Yeah, he's almost the most likable character in the whole movie.
He really is. Yeah. I really enjoy his portrayal, and I wasn't going to bring him up, but maybe I will really quickly. The actor who plays him. It was Reginald VelJohnson.
Oh, that's a name.
Yeah, who reprises his role in another Die Hard film, because, spoilers, there's more Die Hard films to watch.
We should talk about that later. 'Cause
we will.
After rewatching the first movie, I have significantly less respect for the other movies.
Until you watch them again, you'll learn to love them.
Okay, we'll see.
Let's get to directed and then writer, and then we'll move into who is this movie for. Okay. So the director is John McTiernan, who also directed Predator, great action sci-fi film starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, and The Hunt for Red October starring Sean Connery.
Wow.
Which is actually what he followed up this film with.
What a filmography.
Yeah, but he's not a great dude. He spent time in jail for wiretapping a producer on one of his films and then lying about it to the FBI. And there's also some stuff online about him and his wife and wiretapping stuff in their divorce.
Wait, what the?
So, yeah, he went to jail. Yeah.
Wiretapping?
Yeah.
Who's he, Nixon?
Yeah. So
he saw the Watergate scandal and he was like, I could get away with this.
So, not a great dude. We probably don't need to talk about him any more than that.
You're just going to leave me with that? Okay.
Yeah.
I'll Google it later.
Yep.
You know, it's a sad reflection of our times that as soon as you said not a great dude, I immediately thought he was guilty of something else.
No.
And then you said wiretapping. Like, what?
Yeah, and that's maybe why it's why he's not prevalent in Hollywood anymore, but also why he's not like, let's bring up him for being a wife abuser or cheater or sex person.
He's just a dirty wiretapper.
Yeah. But anyway, let's move on.
Okay.
Jeb Stewart, the writer of the film, or the screenwriter of the film, wrote The Fugitive after, starring Harrison Ford. Great movie.
Oh, shit.
And recently actually did Vikings Valhalla on Netflix. It's a TV series. I think it's a spin-off of Vikings. I haven't seen either of them yet, but it's on my watch list.
The Fugitive is one of those movies my parents showed me and my sister a lot. I probably watched that movie on VHS like 5 times.
Wow, I've only seen it like once or twice probably. I remember
Yeah.
really enjoying it, but it's just
haven't-
not something I've returned to.
I haven't seen it since I was a kid.
Yeah.
So I probably don't remember anything from it.
We'll
but-
do it on the podcast at some point.
Okay.
It's on the list. I also wanted to mention Jeb Stewart as well, because in the writing process of writing the character of John McClane, he described the character that he wanted to write as a flawed hero who learns a lesson in the worst possible situation and becomes a better, but not a different person, which I thought was a really interesting characterization. And I think he was successful in writing the character of John McClane in the way that he wanted to tell that story.
Better but not different is an interesting way of putting it.
When I read that, I was like, I need to bring that up because I understand what he means though.
It's, this is such a weird comparison, but I'm just going to shoot from the hip.
Okay.
We were talking about Rick and Morty in the new season and how this new season of Rick and Morty has, in my opinion anyway, been taking more pains to paint Rick as a better person. Mm-hmm. And I was talking to my roommate about it, and I'm like, it's not so much like he's a good person now, he's just less shitty.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So but I like that.
Who is this movie for?
Everyone.
Yes, it is widespread appeal. If you've never seen Die Hard, you need to watch it. Actually, fun fact, Jason recently showed this to our friend Kelvin, who we created this podcast for, who doesn't watch old movies, and he really liked it because obviously it's Die Hard. It's
Die Hard.
It's a classic. It's a classic action movie. There's something for you in this movie. There's something for everyone in this movie, whether it's the portrayal of Hans Gruber, whether it's the everyman style of John McClane, whether it's the comedic aspects of the movie, whether it's just the pure action element of it.
You know what blew me away about this movie on rewatch?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I had forgotten how charming this movie was.
Yes.
Like, down to, like, the subtle things, too. Like, how there's that little, like, access room where there's, like, a pinup girl on the wall. And John, like, runs by and, like, he pauses and, like, almost dislocates his neck looking over his shoulder at it. And then later in the movie, he's being chased by bad guys. He runs through the same room, looks at the calendar and nods at it. It goes, ladies.
Yep.
It just keeps going. Like,
this movie has a lot of depth to it.
Yeah, also that.
And that wasn't the actual intention of the film from the get-go. And it's actually a product of the need of the set, basically, to have added all of this depth. And I think that's also what adds to the charm of the film. And I don't want to spoil my thought process on that or do a deeper dive on that without getting into spoilers. So I'm going to leave it at that. And then once we get into spoilers, I'm going to kind of expand on that thought.
Okay.
Yeah, so obviously, I think we don't even need to say any more about who this movie is for. How do the effects hold up for you in this movie? This is a 1998 film. We're pre-CGI. What did you think of all the effects?
Honestly, I have no complaints. Like, I watched it on a bigger TV and higher definition. I didn't watch it on my phone or my laptop, as I've done for a lot of these movies. Mm-hmm. But no, I thought it looked great. Like,
so did I.
I like no notes. Like,
holds
great.
up.
Yeah,
holds up to a modern watch. It's one of those kind of final movies of an era of doing all the stunts live with real stunt people.
We're gonna throw Bruce Willis off this building.
Legit, real elements of danger involved in the making of this film, and that's something that you miss in modern movies. Like, there's no underscored real danger, and for better or worse. That
for better or worse, yeah. Like, I want all my actors to be in immense peril at all times, but even the scene where John sets off the C4 and part of the building blows up, I did have a moment where I'm like, holy crap, like, that was a big wild explosion.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that's property damage, but no, this movie holds up shockingly well.
Yeah.
Like, even the dialogue is on point, like, everything's on point. For the most part.
I agree.
Except for maybe the hairstyles. Like, Holly's big 80s perm is kind of funny.
Yeah. Yeah, I will say that the movie, it holds up to a modern watch because, in part, the pacing is so crisp. Like, this movie is always moving, and it's moving the plot along really well, and there's always something to be worried about next. There's always something coming around the corner that's being thrown at John.
Yeah, definitely.
When to watch. Obviously, this is a blockbuster movie. It's a ton of fun to watch. This is not one of those sad, depressing movies that we've maybe been doing a little
Sure, done a few of those.
Yeah, I've done a few of those in the last few months. But this is a great movie. It's laugh out loud funny at times. It's edge of your seat, action packed at some times. It's tense. It's everything. It's just a really great cinematic watch. So watch it as a big movie night. Watch it with a friend. Watch it with family.
It's really a movie that's meant to be experienced with other people.
I agree. And I would really love to see this in a theater with other people as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So if you have any local theaters that show old movies, maybe keep an eye out for this one being presented in theaters. Because I'd like to have that experience sometime.
Yeah, definitely.
And this is where I ask you the question, do you think this is a Christmas movie? Because that also brings up, should you be watching this around the holidays?
You know what? I'm going to be a real see you next Tuesday and deflect the question.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really think it matters. I read somewhere.
Wow. All right.
Yeah.
That's an opinion.
I read somewhere that I guess Bruce Willis does not consider it a Christmas movie, and the director does consider it a Christmas movie. I'm just kind of like throwing up my arms in the sense I'm like, I don't like it's a great movie. Like, it doesn't, like, I don't care whether it is or the other. It's a great movie.
I would say that, so the film obviously takes place over the holidays. It's
On
taking
Christmas
place.
Eve.
Yeah, it's during a work Christmas party is kind of the plot point to get everybody together at the building to celebrate and kind of gets that plot moving forward. So I actually did a count throughout the film of how many direct references to Christmas and the holidays there were. And there was at least 20 direct references and times in the movie where they brought up Christmas. It's been voted one of the best Christmas movies of all time several times, including most recently in the 2015 British film magazine Empire.
Okay. Well, if Empire said it.
Yeah, so here's where I land on this, is I think you bring up a good point, like, does it matter? But I think it does.
Okay.
Because I think that this is a movie that I come back to in December of every single year almost, because the excuse that it is around the Christmas times, it's around the holidays, just makes it a good excuse to rewatch. And it's a film that is, in my opinion, infinitely rewatchable. So it provides me an opportunity every year to have the excuse to throw on Die Hard.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and for that reason, I think it's a Christmas movie. I think also the fact that we just talked about how you should be watching it with other people. There's the Christmas kind of bringing people together kind of vibe, and that's present within this movie itself as well. So I think for all of those reasons, I've classified as a Christmas movie in my opinion.
You know, I'm immediately going to backtrack on what I just said. I didn't really listen to or read any other reviews of the movie before coming here, but I did watch. There's a YouTube channel called Cinema Therapy. Like, they talk about mental health issues or interpersonal issues as portrayed in movies and TV shows. And I did watch their episode on Die Hard, and one of the hosts said that he made a good point that all great Christmas movies are about family reconciliation, in which case this movie is a Christmas movie.
Yeah, and it definitely qualifies under that. And we've already talked about the plot and the estranged relationship between John and Holly. Where to watch? Right now, Die Hard is streaming on Disney Plus, which is where I watched it.
Where I watched it too. I didn't rent this one on YouTube like I have for all of our other movies.
Yep, so you can watch it for free if you have that streaming service. I also have the box set of all the Die Hard movies because I am a Die Hard fan.
I see what you did there. Just for those of you listening, Blake looked really proud of himself when he said that.
It just came to me.
Yeah. All right.
And yeah, I can't recommend this movie enough. You already recommended it at the beginning, and this is my turn to pitch this movie as something that you need to see. If we ever get to the point where we make our 100 movies that you need to see before you die list, this would absolutely be on there and probably be one of the top action movies on that list.
I would also say, like, even if you're not necessarily a fan of action movies, you would still probably really enjoy this movie. Because, like, this is definitely an action movie, but it's There's like you mentioned, there's a lot of depth and nuance to this movie that maybe your average action movie doesn't necessarily have. Like, some of my favorite parts of the movie are actually in the first act before the terrorists arrive. Like,
I very much agree.
yeah, like the movie does a really good job grounding you in John McClane's struggle, like,
And his world and the people within this world.
yeah, like actually, like the first shot of the movie is the plane landing on the tarmac, and then we cut to a close-up shot of John McCain's hand.
John McCain?
Let me try that again. We cut to a close-up shot of John McClane's hand making a fist around the armrest, and you see his wedding band in full view. And that, even just that shot alone, really tells you a lot about what's going on.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like
Yeah.
it sets up that he's married. It sets up that he's nervous. He's not infallible. He has fears, that he's afraid of flying.
Yeah, and he's also just, as a New York cop, he's a fish out of water.
Yeah, that's a
He's
great point as well.
He's in a world he doesn't really understand.
And we've talked about that before on that podcast, how that often creates really good storytelling, really compelling storytelling. Like, for example, in Jaws with Roy Scheider's character, and how he's as well, I believe he was a New York cop as well, and he's, again, fish out of water in this resort town, this holiday town,
I'd forgotten
vacation
that part.
town. Yeah, and
he's literally on the water later. With
yeah,
Clint.
and
Clint.
that, yeah, we used the fish out of water a lot during that episode. But anyway, I think that's it for our spoiler-free talk. I can't recommend this movie enough if you've never seen it. If you have already seen it and haven't seen it for a while, check it out again, because it's awesome.
It is awesome.
And
it also, maybe not to go there, but it ages it's aged pretty well too. Like, you look at some content from like 20 or 30 years ago, and occasionally something extremely offensive will come up. And there's maybe
for the most part, like you said earlier, it's almost wholesome.
Yeah, like there's a couple of moments. Okay, like there's one moment where I think Ellis, the cocaine addict, says some, like, a racial slur dribbles out his mouth, and nobody blinks. So you're just like, oh, okay. But other than that, it holds up pretty well.
I would agree,
and
it holds up very well to rewatches.
Actually, there might be one aspect of this movie that maybe wouldn't gel with modern audiences, but we can talk about that later.
Okay, cool. That sounds good to me. So, yeah, we're cutting it off right now. Go check this out and come and join us later for the spoiler full discussion and all of the backstory behind this movie.
Spoilerific.
Okay, so let's start with our in front of the camera discussion and work our way back to behind the scenes.
Sure.
I want to talk about the first act, like we've kind of alluded to, is my favorite part of the movie. I really love when John McClane is sneaking around and nobody knows that he's there. Like, none of the bad guys know.
Yeah.
And it's him kind of, like processing everything and doing his like detective work. And it's really cool to see that, because there isn't really a lot of other films that kind of frame the action hero in that sense. Right?
Yeah, like to give this a little more historical perspective, maybe. Like, again, the big action stars before this were Stallone and Schwarzenegger, who, were basically muscle-bound titans who were, I mean, this maybe isn't totally fair, but they seemed almost indestructible.
Yeah,
right?
like run into the fire, like kind of indestructible.
In Commando, Arnold Schwarzenegger is like fighting off 50 people and none of them can hit him, like stuff like that, right?
And whereas in this one, like I think that you can really connect quickly with John, especially in those scenes where he's like just doing his detective work. Like, I really feel like it could be me there, and like I'm just trying to like stay out of the viewpoint of the bad guys and trying to figure out how am I gonna save everybody? Like, what do I do?
Yeah.
How do I alert the authorities and get people here and get help, basically?
There's a great line when he gets on he's able to like access a radio channel, and there's the operator's like, "Sir, this line is for emergencies only." He's like, "Yeah, no shit. What do you think I'm doing? Ordering a pizza?" Like, and she's like, she says something like, "Sir, if you don't get off, there's gonna have to blah blah blah." And he's like, "Good, come down here and arrest me."
Yeah. And something else about the portrayal of John McClane that is really important to note as well is the fact that he is vulnerable and he's a fallible hero. Like he has problems. Like he's not perfect like what we were comparing Stallone and Schwarzenegger to.
Yeah.
I want to actually compare this to a Marvel movie because that's all we have anymore is Marvel movies.
Yeah. We've entered the Marvel singularity.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's a good frame of reference for modern audiences. And if you think about the Marvel movies prior to the Guardians of the Galaxy, we've got these infallible heroes, these invulnerable heroes that you really don't ever feel like they're going to fail or are never going to drop the ball. They're perfect from start to finish. Maybe they have some internal struggles within, but you never really. They don't feel like bumbling idiots ever.
Well, and also their struggles seem a lot more like Tony Stark's a great example. Like he's billionaire philanthropist, blah blah blah. His big character flaw is what? Like his own narcissism.
Ego? Yeah,
ego, and like. I mean, okay, yeah, I think every single human being on the planet has a bit of an ego and has to struggle with it. But, like, it's harder to relate to a billionaire philanthropist than it is to, like, a 30-something dude whose marriage is in trouble.
Yeah, and also, like think of the Guardians of the Galaxy again. Like, think about Peter Quill in Guardians of the Galaxy. He's a character who has flaws. Like he's not perfect. He doesn't get through every situation with a plan or escape every situation in the intended way that he intends to.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of that pivotal moment. And this is a pivotal moment in action movies because we get this setup for this action hero that the studio didn't even know was going to be successful at this time or not because of prior films in this genre just didn't present that kind of a hero. And so this really pivoted into the more relatable kind of action hero at this point in time.
Yeah, like it's honestly the best scene in the movie is towards the end when his feet are all glassed up and he's talking to Powell on the radio and he's like, he has that great line where he says like, she heard me say I love you 1,000 times, but she never heard me say I'm sorry. Like, fuck. Like, this poor guy.
And you just brought up Al and Holly, referenced them there. And I actually wanted to maybe discuss this a little bit. In my opinion, there's actually 4 main heroes of this film. And those are John, Al, Holly, and Argyle. And each one of them rise to the occasion in their own way. And each play an important role in saving the day. And I think that actually is really helpful in A, making this a good Christmas movie, and B, just making this a really enjoyable movie to watch because we never, like, in the end, all of our heroes rise and are successful. And we just, like, we don't have to see somebody fall. There's no, like, none of them have to die and kind of maybe blacken what is otherwise a really triumphant movie.
Yeah, and it kind of, it maybe shows a more kind of united we stand mentality, right?
Yeah.
Like, John can't figure this out on his own. Like, he needs help, right? Even when he's doing his best on his own, like, we still see, there's that great scene where Holly stands up to Hans Gruber and she's advocating for her coworkers, right? Or we're seeing Powell, like, trying to keep the dumb chief of police from killing everybody.
Yeah.
Right? Like
multiple times.
Yeah. Also, I have to say, I really admire the confidence on Argyle to not really know what was going on, but still be brave enough to ram his limo into a vehicle.
And then punch him.
Yeah, punch him right in the face. And what a clean punch it was, too. Like, immediately knocked the guy out.
Yeah, and that was an actual punch. He accidentally hit the guy right in the face, so.
Ouch.
But yeah, I really appreciate that aspect of the film. On the flip side, I think there's some really great depth to the villains of this movie as well. And I'm not just speaking about Hans, but I'm speaking, there's a well-rounded group of villains here. We see like the brothers. We see the who are betting on whether or not Joseph Tagagi is going to tell them what the code is or if he's going to be shot or not. Like little details like that. There's the comedian who's always kind of throwing out those one-liners, and he's almost like too snarky for his own good.
The guy cracking the safe, right?
Yeah.
So you didn't keep me around for my charming personality.
Exactly. I smile at that every time.
Yeah.
And Hans himself is just one of the greatest villains and greatest portrayal of villains in films. He's so self-assured with himself, and he's got every situation planned for, and he's like everything is according to his plan.
Yeah, and also like, okay, the cinema therapy pointed this out. The scene where Holly stands up to him and she's like, well, like my one coworker is pregnant and she's sitting on a rock. Can we take her into my office and put her on a couch? He's like, no, but I'll have a couch brought out. Like, he's actually like, he's professional, right? Mm-hmm. He's not compassionate. He's just professional. He's like, fine, I'll meet you halfway on this, right?
Right.
He's not just twirling his mustache at everyone.
Yeah, exactly. He's, very, very well written, and I'm going to talk about that in effects and filming later, about how all of this came to coalesce together. I want to talk about some of the little moments that I hadn't ever noticed, or maybe I'd forgotten about in the film. The depth of the storytelling here is really special, and it's a film that you can either half watch and still enjoy a lot, or pay a ton of attention to and get a lot of cool details from. And on this watch is maybe the most detailed I've ever paid attention to this movie for this podcast. And there's a couple things that I noticed on this that I maybe hadn't paid attention to as much before in world building, and characterizations. And for example, the one that I noticed was that Hans wanted the rest of his henchmen to essentially just lock John McClane in the elevator shaft and be done with him. He was like, the elevators are shut down, just lock him in there, and we don't have to worry about him.
That's so pragmatic, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to fight this guy.
And Carl's like, no, I'm going to murder him because he killed my brother.
Right.
And that whole, like, plot device is the reason why John is still relevant throughout the movie. And it's really cool because that comes up later, because Hans says to Carl, if you'd listened to me earlier, we wouldn't have been dealing with this problem anymore.
There's this great line towards the end from Carl where him and John are having their big fight, and Carl says to him, like, we're both professionals, but this is personal.
Yeah.
I was like, that's a great line. Yeah. By the way, I have to bring this up. When they're fighting and John says to him, like, you should have heard your brother squeal when I broke his neck.
Right.
As much as I love John McClane, that's got to be one of the most vicious burns a hero has ever given. That's one of the most vicious things I've ever heard a hero say in a movie.
Yeah, it wasn't heroic at that point. It was just vindictive.
Yeah, it was. I'm not saying it like took me out of the movie or anything. I was just kind of like, wow, like, okay.
The other small detail that I noticed here and actually chuckled at was when the deputy police chief sends in the SWAT guys, and so everybody's swarming the building, and Powell's saying, like, you're sending these guys to the slaughter, like, you don't know who you're dealing with here. And what a little moment that I noticed this on this watch that had me laughing was the SWAT guys going through the bushes, and this one SWAT guy touches some roses, and he goes, ooh, Jesus, roses. And he like cuts himself. And I
forgot about
that moment, because I was like, oh, this is like really great painting the picture of these guys are really not equipped to deal with what is about to unfold.
I will say, earlier I mentioned just the scope of the, we watched, what's that Canadian movie we did a couple months ago? I wasn't here. It was
Cube?
Cube, yeah. One of the things I found really interesting about Cube was how you never see the outside of the cube.
Right.
The whole movie takes place.
Man, this is your Cube redemption moment.
I've been sitting on this. But one of the things I really admired about Cube was how there's no flashbacks, there's no exterior shots. We are in the cube with the characters. It really helps us identify with them, and it creates a huge sense of claustrophobia.
Right.
Whereas Die Hard kind of it shows that there's a whole world going on outside of Nakatomi Plaza.
Yeah.
And just from a writing standpoint, it's so interesting how the terrorists they're easily the biggest threat to John, but everyone else is just constantly making things worse for him. The reporters, the police, as a writer, you want to inflict as much pain and suffering and as much tension. You want to create as much tension as you can. And it's funny how what's going on outside the tower is just making John's life more complicated.
Right.
Like, he's not just dealing with the terrorists. Like, there's that great scene where they try, like, ramming the gate, and the terrorists shoot a bazooka at them.
Yeah.
And John gets on the radio, and he's like, all right, Hans, you made your point. Like, let him go. Like, It's really interesting. Or at the end, when he's on the roof with the hostages, and he's shooting his gun in the air, trying to scare them back inside because he found the detonators. And, then
the FBI is coming, and they're like, oh, there's one of the bad guys.
Yeah,
Get him.
To be fair, he looks like he's covered in blood and he's firing his gun into the air. Pretty fair, but yeah, then they're shooting at him, and he's avoiding their bullets.
Yeah, there's so many scenes like that that are just, again, so infinitely rewatchable, like so entertaining, and some of them you forget between watches that you're like, oh, I forgot that this moment happened.
I forgot that they did that.
Yeah, like the build up to the end when Hans falls from Nakatomi Plaza, like I forgot kind of how that all went with the gun taped to his back and everything. It's a really great build up, and it's a really triumphant moment because John at that point has been kicked to the curb and taken so much damage that it's like, how is this guy going to pull this off? And it's believable. Like the way he does it is just so it's commendable. Like it's like, I can't believe that you thought of how you were going to do this, and you really pulled it off way.
It's so like in character too.
Yeah,
because it's like Hans would come up with probably like a very efficient, elaborate scheme. Like I feel like Hans would come up with a plan just to show off how smart and how sinister he is. John's just like, fuck it, I'm taping this gun to my back, and then I'm gonna shoot you with it. It's like,
and hopefully, like, it goes well.
Right. It's like the difference between a man with a hammer and a man with a scalpel.
Yeah, and that kind of goes towards the writers were intending with John's character is to basically be a cowboy, like basically be a character out of a Western film.
Basically, yeah.
And that's where we get the fantastic line, the classic "Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker!"
Yeah, which was ad-libbed, right?
Yes, and from it was not ad-libbed. It was a discussion point based on Yippee-ki-yay Kids from an old Western TV show for kids, and they bounced back around a couple of different ways that they were going to do that one.
Okay. Yeah, because like that's an iconic line nowadays, but like I was thinking about it recently, I'm like, what the hell is that from? Like,
yeah, I could
it almost
find
sounds.
it again.
It almost. I'm gonna bring it back to Rick and Morty. It's almost like wubba lubba dub dub levels of gibberish. I'm like, what? Like if I were a terrorist and my adversary said that to me over the radio, I'd be like, are you having a stroke? Like, are you okay?
And that's like that great moment when Hans says it at the end too.
Yeah.
What is that you said to me? And then he does it with his accent that I'm not even going to pretend that I can do.
By the way, I think another one of my favorite moments is when Hans and John run into each other.
Yes.
And they have their little kind of moment, and Hans affects a completely flawless American accent. I'm just gonna say it. Like,
you should be on TV with that accent.
Yeah. And like watching it for the first, like I did remember this one part, but like again, just from a writing standpoint, like I can't imagine how unbearably tense that scene would be for a first-time viewer, especially when John's like, "Here, can you handle this?" and he gives him a gun, right?
Right.
You're like, "Oh shit! Don't do that, John."
And of course, it's unloaded.
Right. Again, that's just, I think one of the great things about this movie is just that cat and mouse game between Hans and John. Like how, like Hans clearly wasn't expecting to run into him, but he just kind of panics, throws on an accent, blah, 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 blah. It doesn't work, but
he's John suspicious, to say the least.
I do love that moment though, where he's like, the gun's unloaded. He's like, you think I'm fucking stupid, Hans? Yeah.
Yeah, it's lots of great scenes like that. The last kind of mention of something that I didn't notice, and I didn't follow my train of thought on this before I read this, but it was a theory online, is when Ellis and Gruber have their discussion together, and Ellis essentially sells out John to save everybody in his mind. There's the moment when John and Ellis are on the phone together, and Carl brings him a Coke.
Yeah.
And so the most likely reason behind this is because, and this is theorized online, that because of Ellis's cocaine habit, he probably said to the Germans, "Could you get me some Coke?" And he was talking about obviously the drug, and they didn't put that together and went and grabbed him like a Coca-Cola.
That's actually really funny.
Yeah,
that completely went over my head.
Yeah, it's something that on a future watch I'm going to really appreciate that level of detail. But
I did want to talk about that scene. That is because like Ellis is presented as kind of this jackass and maybe even like a potential threat to John and Holly's marriage. Right? Like he's clearly,
he's the big corporate exec. Like he's obviously important within the business. He's got the hots for Holly. He doesn't care that she's married or not married at all.
There's that great line at the beginning when John and Holly are talking, and Holly's like, "Yeah, Ellis gets depressed this time of year. He thought he was God's gift." Like, wow, that's a great line. But one thing that I did think was interesting was how he goes to Hans pretending that him and John are best friends and that he invited John, and then he gets on the radio and he's going to try to talk he's trying to talk John into turning himself in because he thinks that if they just cooperate with the terrorists, everything will be fine, right?
Right.
The one thing I did think was kind of interesting is the fact that he didn't actually rat out Holly.
No.
And I'm not saying that makes him redeemable. I just remember, like, when I watched this movie a couple nights ago, I'm like, oh, crap, like, this is how Hans is going to find out that John and Holly are married. But in a way, like, the word noble does not belong anywhere near Ellis, but like, I was a little kind of like, this is like not admirable, but it's kind of interesting that like, he is kind of putting himself on the line.
But he thinks he's above being at any risk. Like he thinks he's himself as such a good salesman that he can sell this whole plot to the
Hans
bad guys.
Booby. Yeah.
Which, actually, fun fact on that. That was an ad-libbed moment, and that was the first time that he had said that. And so the baffled look that Hans has after he says that was the honest response
completely
that Alan
genuine,
Rickman
right?
had.
Yeah. Like, huh. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny how like Hans is clearly the villain, right? But like Ellis and the journalist, we almost hate them more.
Yes.
Because like we at least kind of respect Hans.
Right.
But these guys there's something very
grimy.
Slimy.
Yeah, slimy.
Like,
yeah.
There's also just something kind of pathetic about them, right?
Yeah, there's nothing commendable about them. Like you couldn't be like, well, like they're doing this for this purpose or X reason or Y reason. It's just like they're in a place which is slimy and
opportunistic.
Yeah. And their personalities just like, they're not people that you would want to spend any time with. Whereas hanging out with Hans could be kind of fun, in a sense.
As long as you're on his side.
Yeah. Hans would come up with some pretty great plans.
Yeah. Well, at least, I don't know. Again, but going back to that scene, I remember thinking, like, it's interesting the fact that Ellis is not, like, in his mind, he's selling out John, but he's not implicating Holly. Maybe because he's thinking John will get killed and then he can just swoop in, but I did think that was kind of interesting that he didn't do the most deplorable thing.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not defending Ellis. I'm not secretly captain of the Ellis fan club. I was just kind of like, oh, okay, like interesting.
Yeah, he's not a black and white bad character.
No, he's just kind of pathetic.
Yeah, he's pathetic. That's a good way to put it.
Like, even John, who's not in the room, is like, Ellis, tell them you don't know me. You're about to get killed. Like, yeah. And he's even trying to reason with Hans. Like, Hans, I don't know this asshole. Like,
right.
Yeah. So, and even just, again, I have to just commend this movie for how much tension there is. The fact that there's the walkie-talkies in the radio, the fact that whenever, like, John can't talk to anyone without Hans listening. Like, that's so, just from a tension standpoint, that's like, mwah, chef's kiss, right?
Right.
Like, he can't talk to anyone without, like, Hans listening in and overhearing it. So,
And that's
yeah.
kind of why they talk in code a little bit in the beginning, where Powell doesn't know for sure that he's a cop, but he has
call
the
me
hunch.
Roy. Yeah.
There's one other scene that I want to actually mention, and it's the vents. It's a very famous scene where John McClane is crawling through the vents to
Now
kind
I
of
know what a
evade the
TV dinner
captors.
feels like.
Yeah, there's some good lines in there. I had to Google whether or not this was the first time that was portrayed on screen, because I think it's one of the more famous crawling through the vent scenes, and it's definitely something that we've seen often parodied or repeated in films since.
It's almost like a trope nowadays. Like, even
Yeah.
the Batman Arkham games, it's like, hide in the vents. Like,
Right,
yeah.
exactly. And so it's something that, like, nowadays with the internet, like, everybody knows that obviously is not always practical in, like, 99% of situations. It has happened in real life, though, before.
Has it?
I did read that. But I found that the earliest use that I found was from It, The Terror from Beyond Space in 1958.
What a title.
And then there was a 1962, I believe, James Bond movie that also did something similar.
So there's a movie where James Bond in, like, a three-piece, $3,000 suit is crawling through the vents.
Yeah, so
Okay.
it's something that happened in the late 50s, early 60s, and had been utilized before this film, but I would definitely say that this is one of the more memorable crawling through the vents action sequences.
In some ways, the most iconic.
Yeah, I
crawling
would
through the
agree.
vents. There's also that great scene where Carl is standing under the vents and, like, poking them
Yeah,
with the barrel
what
of
a
his
tense
gun.
moment.
Yeah, and he's just about to find John, but then something captures his attention.
Yeah.
That's kind of the other thing I want to bring up, actually. One thing that I thought was interesting was not exactly racial tensions, but there is some kind of, well, let me just say, like, I found it really interesting how there almost felt like there was some echoes of World War II in this movie, in the sense that, like, John's your classic blue-collar, all-American guy, and then the bad guys are all European. Specifically, like, Hans and Carl are German. There's the one guy who I think is Japanese. Well, the whole plaza is owned by a Japanese company.
Yeah.
And then one of the bad guys, I'm pretty sure one of the bad guys, Marco, is Italian.
Right.
So it's interesting how it's like all of America's old quote-unquote enemies have, like, come back with a vengeance. And I thought that was interesting, especially considering the fact that the John McClane character in the book that this was based on was apparently a World War II veteran.
Yes, and we're going to talk about the book very soon, I think. We'll move into our effects and filming.
Yeah.
The other last kind of thing, actually, this is more effects and filming. Do you want to just move to effects and filming, or do you have any more scenes you want to share?
I could talk about this for a while, so let's just move on.
Okay, sounds good. All right, effects and filming, based on a book, like you said. The book itself is called Nothing Lasts Forever by Roderick Thorpe.
Terrible title.
Yeah, especially for what the book is about. Although the book is quite a bit different than the movie portrayal. The book itself is much darker in tone than the movie.
I think I read that, like, the hero is actually almost a homicidal maniac in the book.
I was going to say that, actually.
Oh, okay.
I didn't read much about the character himself. Like, I know that his name was Joe Leyland, and the reason why he's at the Nakatomi Plaza is because his daughter is there, and his daughter actually dies along with Hans. They both fall off the building at the same time, and it's implied at the end of the novel that Joe is probably going to die from his wounds as well.
It's almost kind of like how Rambo was based on a book, or Rambo is a book first, and, like, he dies in the book, but he goes on to become a muscle-bound action star thanks to Hollywood.
Yeah, and that's also something, and I'm getting a little off topic here with the book, but that's also something that's somewhat compelling about the movie that maybe has become less relevant now that we have so many sequels to the movie, is that because John is so fallible, like, you really don't know if he's going to survive. And
Yeah.
because he takes so much damage throughout the movie, and there's so many great tension building scenes and moments, and even the ending. It's like, how is John going to save Holly and with two bad guys here who both have weapons pulled on him? And that's like, it's really great building up of that, and I've kind of lost my thought process of where I was going.
I think I'm right here with you. Don't worry. Yeah, I think I haven't read the book, but I think I read somewhere that there's like a scene in the book where like Leland takes one of the terrorist hostages and then he just decides to kill him anyway.
Right.
So like, I couldn't see John doing that.
The actual story behind how the book was made was it's actually a sequel to The Detective, I believe the first book is called, by Roderick Thorpe, and he got the idea from a dream actually after watching the movie The Towering Inferno, which stars Paul Newman and Steve McQueen. A movie I haven't seen before, but I'd like to watch.
You know what? Those two would make a good duo. They
Yeah.
should do something with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to watch that at some point, and I've got it written down now for a potential movie we might do in the podcast.
Interesting.
And so he had the dream based on that, but also of like a man running around an office building being shot at, and woke up and wrote Nothing Lasts Forever. Similarities of the book and the film. There's, like we said, there's a lot of differences between tone and some of the setup, but some of the really great action moments from the movie are from the book. Like, for example, like crawling through the vents was written in the book. Dropping the bomb down the elevator shaft was something that was in the novel.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah, when John jumps off the roof with the fire hose, that was written in the novel as well.
Huh. So it's almost kind of like they lifted all the action beats from the novel and the setting, but then they kind of put their own flavor on it.
Yeah, and even like the taping of the gun was behind his back was from the book. And so you actually brought up a good point there. The reason why it's different is because the book itself is told solely through the eyes of John.
Okay.
So we don't know any of the other stuff happening around the plaza, like what Hans's main motivations are necessarily, or even like, you know, the stuff between Hans and Holly.
It's almost like Cube, right? Like,
yeah.
It's almost like the camera, the book anyway. If it were a direct adaptation of the book, the camera would be right on John.
Yeah, and a lot of these changes actually came out of necessity of filming, which is what I wanted to talk about earlier, because Bruce Willis himself almost didn't take the role because he was on the show Moonlighting at this time, which is a very popular show in the 80s.
That's right. That's what he was primarily known for.
Yeah, and so he took a bit of risk with this movie. Not only that, but the producers took a risk with him, and he turned it down because it was going to conflict with his filming of Moonlighting.
Yeah.
But by happenstance, his co-star became pregnant around this time.
Sybil Shepherd, yeah.
Yeah, and so they paused filming of Moonlighting, so he was able to start the process of doing his portrayal of John McClane in this movie. And then at one point it kind of crossed over and they were doing both. So he was working all day doing his scenes for Moonlighting, and then he would go at night and film his scenes for Die Hard. And that's why they had to do all this other writing and all this other depth to all the villains and the other characters, is because they had to add more to the movie because they couldn't utilize John as much as he was originally intended to be used.
And that's so interesting how that could have very easily crippled this movie, but it almost turns into a strength because, like I said, like one of the things that I didn't remember about the movie was just the scope, like all the different players, that are revolving around John and Hans. Yeah.
And that's what I was bringing up earlier. Like, there's so many positive aspects. Like, the depth of the villains and the depth of the heroes here is something that you don't get in a lot of action movies.
Not even
let
today.
Alone, yeah, let alone other movies in general. Like, I'm trying to think of the last action movie I saw. Like, I haven't watched an action movie this year, really. Yeah. I guess I watched The Matrix, but
I guess our Marvel movies.
They're action movies, but I haven't seen a Marvel movie in a while.
The last Marvel movie I saw was the new Thor, and spoiler alert, it sucks.
But like
I feel like the only honest to God action movies I can think of right now are probably like the John Wick movies.
Yeah,
and the last one came out like 3 years ago.
And like to compare that to this, like, think about how many great characters there are in portrayals, and how they work with so little. Like, there's so many really interesting lore to that you kind of almost have to infer.
You talking about John Wick?
Yeah, John Wick. Like,
Yeah.
like, think about how many characters are in that universe, and this movie does kind of something similar, but instead of leaving it to the audience to infer these characters and their motivations and their personalities, this movie actually just has all of that, and it does it really well. And that's a really big positive for me personally.
Yeah, and even, like, you know, it's kind of funny how things go in circles, right? Because I almost feel like John McClane and Bruce Willis was sort of a reaction to, like, the invincible Supermen of the 80s, and now here we are in the 2020s, and, like, you know, like, there is some nuance to a guy like John Wick, but for the most part, like, he's what are the body counts in those movies, right?
Yeah.
Like, in number 3, he murders in the first 5 minutes, he kills a guy with a book.
Yeah.
Which is awesome, but, like, and, you know, there's a little bit of emotional nuance to the fact that he's grieving for the loss of his wife, but yeah, so now in 10 years after the John Wick movies get tired, we're gonna have a new vulnerable action hero.
Yeah, it's a cycle.
Played
I
by
agree.
me.
So on the kind of the train of thought of the writer and the screenplay of the movie. So we had our original write of the film and the intention of John McClane's character, but Stephen E. D'Souza also rewrote the script as well after
That's
that.
the director?
No, it's another screenwriter. There's
okay.
a couple screenwriters on this. And so he wanted to kind of blend more action and comedy together, and he had some experience coming into this movie with that. And he also, when he wrote the film, decided to approach his writing of the screenplay with Hans as the central protagonist of the film. And he basically, his reasoning for that was, if Hans hadn't planned the robbery and put it all together, then McClane would have just gone to the party and either reconciled or not reconciled with his wife. So he said, sometimes you should think about looking at your movie through the point of view of the villain, who is really the one driving the narrative, which is a really interesting way to think about and conceptualize writing. And I thought that was something that maybe you'd really appreciate as a writer, taking a different approach or perspective to your writing style to really maybe add those layers in there that might not have been in there.
Yeah, well, that
in the
is
first write.
That is interesting that, like, in a lot of works of fiction, the heroes are just reacting to the villain. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It's almost kind of like
well, Raiders of the Lost Ark is a great example of that.
Yeah, or even I remember when Infinity War came out, people were blown away by it, and how the Russo brothers decided to essentially make Thanos the protagonist. Like,
right.
That is a really interesting point, because, yeah, you're right. Like, you know, like, what is a hero without a villain, right? Because then it's just a domestic drama of John McClane. Maybe there's another timeline where Die Hard is just John McClane being miserable at the party and realizing that, like, his marriage is going to fail and fall apart.
Yeah, it's inevitable.
Yeah.
Just like Thanos.
Yeah. Nice.
So what you were actually mentioning earlier is I think you said that you were like, you commended the storytelling, the storyboarding of the movie, and how everything felt very cohesive and well written.
Yeah.
Funny enough, though, a lot of the film wasn't actually storyboarded, because the cinematographer basically said, you know, if we storyboard all this, then my job's redundant, essentially.
And what a weird thing to say.
Yeah, so basically they were like, okay, we want to shoot this part of the story today, and then him and the director would just kind of work on how they would film it and shoot in detail.
They just kind of wing it, eh?
Yeah, and basically, like, they would talk about, like, the feeling or the sensation that they wanted to convey with those shots and with that scene. And so that's kind of what their focus was, and his focus in particular was he wanted to create a dramatic shot rather than attractive shots, like, really well. Like, yeah.
Okay, interesting.
And so to push the plot over just making really beautiful looking set pieces or shot piece in
like,
the set.
he wanted it more dynamic as opposed to just focusing on well composed, pretty shots.
Yeah, like maybe less Stanley Kubrick and more Michael Bay. That's a bad comparison, but
I get what you mean, though. Yeah, Michael Bay wishes he could make a movie this good.
yeah.
Whatever happened to Michael Bay? Is he still making
He's
movies?
still very relevant to the people who like Michael Bay, which clearly
probably
is
not anyone listening to this podcast.
You never know. You never
Michael
know.
Bay's laying in bed right now listening to this podcast with like tears streaming down his cheeks because he was a big fan.
Yeah, I'm not a big Michael Bay fan myself, but I enjoy some of his movies. They're movies that you don't think too hard during.
You know what? He's like the cinematic equivalent of like Nickelback. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Like kind of a guilty pleasure.
Yeah, I would agree.
Probably doesn't deserve the flack it gets.
That's probably enough Michael Bay that we have
You
to
know
talk
what?
about.
You know
too.
what? Michael Bay, Nickelback probably doesn't deserve the flack it gets, but kind of just fun to dunk on.
All right, there's our Michael Bay discussion and Die Hard.
I didn't think I'd be
today.
talking about Michael Bay when I woke up this morning, but here I am.
Oh man. The first scene that Bruce Willis acted out for the movie was the scene when he jumped from the roof of Nakatomi Plaza with the fire hose wrapped around him. That was the actual first scene. And so he did a lot of his own stunts in the film.
I read that, yeah.
And so he was basically supposed to jump off a parking garage about 25 feet high, and then there was a 60-foot wall of flame that was going to explode behind him. And he basically, like, the explosion actually almost pushed him away from the airbag that he was supposed to land on. And he barely landed on it. And so the crew thought that they had killed Bruce Willis in the first day of him filming.
Whoops.
So
That's going to be a rough call to make to the producer.
yeah, but Bruce Willis really put his body on the line for this, though. Like, he actually suffered permanent hearing.
Yeah, I read
Loss.
that. Like he lost two-thirds of his hearing, right? Because of a malfunctioning squib or something?
Yeah, when they were doing the scene where the guy's standing over the table shooting him from
Marco,
above.
the Italian.
Yeah, and so when Bruce shoots up top, like the sound from the gun, because they were using real guns as well, the sound from it basically almost made him deaf in that moment, which is unfortunate for him personally.
Yeah,
he really put himself out there for us.
I guess so. Jeez, that is unfortunate.
Yeah.
So he almost died. He lost 2/3 of his hearing.
Yeah, and in a lot of his movies subsequent, he was wearing hearing aids in them, and it's not something that you notice in a lot of his films.
Wow, that's really... I shouldn't romanticize that, but that's really suffering for your art, right?
Yeah.
I guess from his perspective, like if he's has to be injured doing a movie, it may as well be like his best movie.
Yeah.
Right?
I agree. On the flip side, a scene that you might have thought looked quite gruesome was when he was walking through all of the glass. And I was interested in how that got pulled off. And apparently he was wearing basically like feet shoes. Like they made him like rubber shoes almost that looked like his feet to pick up the glass, and so it wouldn't damage his actual feet. And apparently, if you pay really close attention to those scenes, you'll note that his feet look like kind of comically big. So
Like-
it's something that I'll be paying attention to on my
So
next
he looks
rewatch.
like a hobbit in those scenes.
Yeah, apparently it's something to maybe pay a little bit more
Can
attention
we-
to and see if you
you
can
know,
notice it.
This is what I mentioned about how good this movie is in terms of like little things paying off in big ways. Like at the start of the movie, he's on the plane and the guy says to him, you know, all you got to do is just take your shoes and socks off, make fists with your feet. That'll help you feel grounded after you land. So he does that after his fight with Holly. Terrorist shows up. He runs, he leaves. He's barefoot the whole movie. Remember he kills Carl's brother? He's like, all the terrorists in the world, and I gotta kill the one with feet smaller than my sister's.
Yeah.
And then he's talking later on. He's having his chat with Hans when Hans is pretending to not be himself. He notices that he's barefoot, and then they're having their big shootout. And Hans has this big shoot the glass.
Yeah.
And then he's walking through broken glass. Like it's just little thing. Like that's why this movie is so great. Just those little things that pay off in big ways.
Right.
It's funny how nobody could picture Bruce Willis as an action star. Now, like I actually, a few years ago, I went back and I watched a couple episodes of Moonlighting, you know, the 80s show that he was famous for, where he was mostly a comic actor. And it's funny how, because of Moonlighting, people in the 80s only saw him as a comic actor until this movie came out. But then because of this movie, I went back and rewatched Moonlighting, and I had a hard time picturing him as a comic actor.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's interesting how his legacy just did a dramatic 180.
I'd like to see Moonlighting at some point.
I will say he's fantastic in Moonlighting.
I believe it.
I was watching it. I'm like, wow, he's hilarious. Like, Bruce Willis is pretty funny. And I mean, you could see that in this movie too, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, let's move into score. And I got to ask you, like, you're not somebody who notices score, whereas I do. Did you notice this score at all? Was there anything about this score that you really appreciated?
I noticed the dramatic stings.
Did you like how they kind of made classic Christmas melodies into like action-packed, tension-building kind of melodies?
I don't know that I even noticed that, to be honest.
That's fair.
I'm the wrong guy to talk to about score.
Yeah, so the score was made by Michael Kamen, who also scored some movies that we've done on the podcast, including The Iron Giant, which is a great film. But he also did the original X-Men movie Band of Brothers, which is a massive TV show that is still on my watch list. And also the second and third installments of Die Hard was involved in those.
Should we talk about the sequels?
Oh, we will. We're getting there. We're getting there. He mixed melodies of Ode to Joy, Winter Wonderland, and Singin' in the Rain into his score to kind of make an atmospheric, like, Christmas score that was also, like I said, it kind of had that action tone, that tension building, and kind of the influence behind this was the film A Clockwork Orange by Stanley Kubrick. And that's what the director was going for as well. And there's a direct reference to Ode to Joy, which is used in there, and Singing in the Rain.
Tonally, you could not get two more different movies than A Clockwork Orange and Die Hard.
Yeah. But it's funny that we got arrived at similar score composing for it, and that's what the director envisioned when he thought of the score of this movie and what he was going for as well. However, there's a cool connection here to another one of my favorite movies, is the movie Aliens.
Oh yeah.
The end scene where Powell shoots Carl, the music that's used there was actually unused track from the movie Aliens, and they didn't use it there, and they decided to clip it and put it in that moment.
Can we talk about Powell's character arc for a moment?
Yeah, I'm very much in.
First of all, I love Powell. The actor, like the dialogue, how he becomes John McClane's like advocate from the outside. I think he's a great character. And his whole thing is he mentions to John that he accidentally shot a third. Okay, remember earlier when I said there's might be some things that modern audiences can't get behind?
Yes.
The whole thing about Powell's whole thing is that he accidentally shot a 13-year-old with a toy gun.
Right.
And ever since then, he's been a desk jockey and he's been unable to pull his gun in the line of duty.
Yeah.
And it's framed as like this is a really sad, tragic thing for him, Powell. Not the kid he shot.
Yeah.
And then there's that, it's a great moment, but I'm kind of conflicted about it because at the end, like Hans is dead. Carl shows up, waves his gun around. Powell whips out his revolver and shoots him. And it's kind of this big dramatic, oh snap, like Powell got his groove back. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like he's overcome his trauma. And I was watching it and I'm like, it is kind of a cool moment, and you kind of get swept along with it at first, but I was thinking about it, I'm like, what is the moral of this story? Like, the best way to get over accidentally shooting a child is to shoot an adult on purpose.
So that's actually a really good discussion that I was reading online a little bit, how this movie is essentially, at its core, the theme is redemption through violence.
Yeah.
And that's a great point. And I think you're right. Like, that is something that in this particular rewatch, because I hadn't actually seen this movie for probably 2 or 3 years, I actually picked up on that. I thought, like, for today's modern audience, that plot point is no longer tragic for the police officer.
Yeah.
It's let's think about everybody who's involved in that. Like, you do kind of wince a little bit that, because you're like, like today we look at that and we go like, that police officer was bad and they were dumb and
right.
and it's their fault, and it not necessarily wasn't anybody's fault but his, but it kind of shows that other side of things. That
it would be a lot to ask a modern viewer to sympathize with a cop who shot a child.
Yes,
that would be a hard sell. Even there's that moment earlier in the movie where John pulls his gun on Heinrich, Carl's brother. And Heinrich's like, oh, you won't shoot me. Like, you're a cop. You have rules. And he's like, yeah, that's what my captain keeps trying to tell me.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like a cool macho one-liner. But also from a 2022 perspective, you're kind of like, ugh, like,
Yeah,
ugh.
I recently watched Dirty Harry, and I kind of got the same vibe from that. And Dirty Harry is kind of trying to glorify that a lot, because it's coming in
Yeah.
from a very different perspective, and it made me kind of squirm almost a little bit because it does feel more out of place in 2022 now, like, than ever.
Well, even like going back to Powell, like, his whole thing is it's almost like, I accidentally shot a child and now I'm a desk jockey. And it's almost kind of like he's been emasculated. Or
Yeah.
he's like a bird with clipped wings, right? And then he whips out his gun and shoots the terrorists. And it's almost kind of like, yeah, like, again, it's like Powell got his groove back. It's almost like, and now through this act of protective violence, he's got his balls back, for lack
Right.
of a better phrase,
Yeah.
right? Which is, again, I like Powell and I like the character, and it is kind of a cool moment, but it is also, it's hard to really get behind that moment these days.
Yeah.
And the message of that moment, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. It's like, good job, Powell. Like, here's your badge and gun. Now get out there and
Yeah.
try not to shoot any more kids.
Yeah, no, I very much agree, and it was something that stuck out with me as well. I'm glad you brought it up because
Yeah.
that's a good discussion point. And that's something that's relevant for modern audiences and for who we're appealing to on this podcast.
Yeah, even maybe the fact that he's the fact that he's a black police officer might make it a little more palatable to a modern audience. Yeah, it is.
The context is different now.
But you're right though, just redemption through violence. It's a very, I guess,
There's a lot of thematic discussion about that online.
yeah, even like I did do a little bit of looking into like the critical consensus of this movie and how John McClane is kind of, for his time anyway, and kind of still now, he's almost comes across as a much more vulnerable than like, Stallone or Schwarzenegger, like a more maybe emotionally intelligent man. But it's still kind of, he's a very macho, masculine, violent figure who's taking care of the bad guys. But one thing that some critics did point out is that there is a lot of dumb macho posturing going on around John, like
Right.
the chief of police or the FBI or even the TV guy,
Yeah.
And they're getting into trouble because they're charging in guns blazing without thinking.
Right.
So, like, in a way, this movie is maybe a little critical of, let's say, masculinity while still kind of glorifying that violent masculine ideal.
Yeah, and that is something, again, that's been discussed quite a bit online about the movie and the portrayal of John and what his character means to the shift in the action star, the ideal action hero.
Even just like this movie takes place in 1988, and there's kind of this tension under the surface in the fact that Holly is probably doing better than John.
Oh,
Like,
yeah,
she's got
definitely.
a better job, like she's probably more respected, and John is,
He's a street cop.
he's a street cop, yeah, which isn't, necessarily a bad job, but he's, and again, it's not really focused on too much in the movie, but this idea that like, yeah, like, John's kind of a blue collar, old fashioned dude, and now he's got his wife out in California with all these yuppies, and she's making more money than him, and
Yeah.
she's got more prestige than he does. Like, that's got to contribute to how threatened he feels.
Yeah, and there's that self-loathing that bubbles up every now and again within the movie, like that first kind of conflict that when he brings up to Holly, like, like you left and you didn't come back kind of thing.
Yeah, or like
And-
you're going by your maiden name now.
Yeah, and it's funny because on this rewatch, like I kind of had forgotten moments like that, and you see that and you're like, oh, like John, like you really should be saying
Come
that.
on, buddy.
And then immediately after that scene, he reflects. He's like, like I'm such an idiot. Like why would I do that? Like
yeah.
He's like I'm literally self-sabotaging myself. Like
Yeah.
and I'm doing it constantly, and he acknowledges it, and it's again like it's a very much in contrast to a lot of other main heroes who don't ever really acknowledge their faults. and when they make mistakes, and it's really something that you really empathize with him, because it's like like you've been in those regrettable situations before where you're like, I wish I didn't do what I just did, but I also don't know how to walk it back and fix it now.
Yeah, like it's almost like he's aware that what he's doing is like, he's aware that he's kind of pig-headed.
Yeah,
but he's also maybe not emotionally smart enough to get himself out of it.
Yeah,
which
I
is
agree.
a sad position to be in when like you're doing something wrong, but you don't know how to stop.
Yeah,
that's something I'm sure we can all relate to at certain points or another. I mean, not me, obviously. I see it in others.
Yeah,
I'm flawless, but I digress. I'm gonna have to walk through broken glass to humble myself later.
Look back at the times. I want to mention a couple things. The film at that time was pitched as Rambo in an office building.
That's really funny.
And the expectations for Die Hard's performance at the box office were pretty low, up to the point of like them actually having filmed it and being ready to putting it out, because like you said before, like Bruce Willis was known for being a comedic TV actor, not like an action hero, and so they really didn't know how to pitch that. And because of like his more grounded and relatable portrayal,
like everyman, yeah,
it was so in contrast to the action movies of that time period that they were really honestly taking a risk with this movie. And funny enough, the critical analysis of the film at that time was really mixed. Like
middling, yeah. I think I read Roger Ebert gave it 2 out of 4 stars.
Yeah, he was actually even more negative than that. And his main focal point of his hatred, what he directed it towards, was the character of Chief Dwayne Robinson. And he basically said that the character was unnecessary, useless, dumb, and prevented the movie from working.
Gee, Roger, that's kind of the point.
Yeah, and it's funny because it's the depth that you and I really appreciated of this movie, and it's so funny because eventually, he saw the other movies and really liked the other movies in the series, and actually changed his opinion on Die Hard later on once his viewing of it had matured. So
it's, going back to Stanley Kubrick, I recently read that when The Shining first came out, people fucking hated it.
Yeah. And
then it was, I don't know, like 5 or 6 or 10 years later, all of a sudden everyone turned around and was like, no, wait, that was actually brilliant.
Yeah. And it seems to be like movies pre-internet are more able to do that because there's less accessible ways to review them.
Or maybe re-watch them?
Yeah, well, definitely like pre-VCR era, right? You'd see the movie in the theaters, and then you might never see that movie again. Yeah. Unless it's maybe playing on TV. You happen to catch it on TV, and it becomes famous through there. But
even then, yeah.
Yeah, so... And some movies became famous just because they were on TV for a number of years, like Thinking It's a Wonderful Life, keeping on theme with the Christmas era. Like, that movie did horrible back in the day, but because it was so cheap to re-air, they just kept re-airing and re-airing, and it became a staple, yeah.
And then it just, Stockholm Syndrome eventually kicked in.
Exactly.
Blah, blah, blah. Well, even, it's funny, before we started recording, we were talking about Dr. Sleep, and I think it came out in, like, November 2019, and not many people went and saw it, but then it started streaming, and all of a sudden people were like, oh, hey, that wasn't that bad.
Well, that was also, in part, as well, the effect of the director's cut and getting more of a sense of what the directors wanted to present from the movie versus what the studio forced them to cut down for a theater widespread audience appeal. Oftentimes, the creative director behind the film is the one you should probably be listening to, who has a clear picture of what the end product should be.
I wonder if, like, with the success of the Dr. Sleep director's cut and the Snyder cut, if we're going to get a lot more of those.
I don't know. I would like to see directors have more autonomy away from the studios to present what they want to present, and there are certain directors who have that level of authority and respect in the biz. Like, no producer is going to give Quentin Tarantino
I was exactly Tarantino was going to be my first choice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it was something as well that, like, for example, Stanley Kubrick really championed in all of his films because he had, I believe it was Spartacus.
Yeah.
He didn't love the direction that the studio took with that. And so he put that in his contract that he had final say on all
Final
cuts.
cut privileges.
Yeah, exactly. And there's films throughout movie history that the director's cut of influenced the modern, I guess not the modern, but that influenced the understanding and the critical acclaim of a film.
Blade Runner is probably the most famous
Blade
example
Runner.
of that.
The other one that I was thinking of was Kingdom of Heaven. I've watched the director's cut of it, and it was actually a really good movie. The director's cut.
The theatrical cut kind of sucked, right?
Yeah, it was. I mean, they cut like an hour out of that movie or something.
I've also heard, you're not going to like this, I've also heard that the Batman versus Superman director's cut is shockingly good.
I heard it was shockingly okay.
Okay.
So we
heard different things.
Yeah, and that's not something that I'm ever going to explore or we're ever going to watch for this podcast because it's modern and I have no interest in it.
And you hate it. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Getting back to
right.
to Die Hard.
This is the episode where I bring up a lot of different directors.
Yeah, we're doing a lot of random discussion, but that's all right.
It's almost like we're the police circling the building trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
And failing spectacularly.
So getting back to the legacy of the film, thinking of Die Hard and the movies, the action movies that followed this, especially in the 90s, it's funny because a lot of those films were pitched not only in the studio room to the execs, but also even like on posters and like for movie pitches to audience. They were basically like pitching movies like it's the Die Hard on A or it's the Die Hard in A kind of thing. And that was the pitch that they used. And a lot of them weren't anywhere near successful to the Die Hard itself, the original movie, and also the franchise as a whole that it became. And we're very close to talking about those. Don't worry.
Okay.
The other cool thing that I was reading about is the directors who were directly inspired by this film within their movies. A couple of them, names that you've probably heard, Darren Aronofsky, Brad Bird, who we talked about.
Oh, yeah. Brad Bird.
The Iron Giant already on this film, or on this podcast episode, but also in a previous episode, Dan Trachtenberg and Paul W. Sanderson all very notably mentioned this movie as primary inspirations. James Gunn also mentioned this movie in 2020 during COVID that this was like a must-watch movie, like something you should check out with the family at home.
You know what? This movie almost could you can kind of get some James Gunn energy from it.
Yeah, I would agree.
Or maybe James Gunn has some Die Hard energy, but
yeah,
that's besides the point.
Okay, it's time for sequels, prequels, and reboots. So, Die Hard spawned a franchise that has 3 sequels, and despite popular belief, there's potentially a 4th movie that I believe is actually a fable, a parody that doesn't exist, that may star Bruce Willis, although I cannot confirm or deny that. You don't need to watch that one. But
you are correct.
We're going to focus on the 3 sequels.
Can I just say that dropping the pretense for a sec. I saw the 5th one in theaters with my friend Vanessa. I remember nothing from it. Like absolutely nothing. Like it was and I have good memory when it comes to movies, but like I just completely blocked it out of my mind because it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist and it can't hurt you.
Right. And I just stared at a blank wall for 2 hours.
It's maybe the best example of you don't need to read all the books or watch all the movies or see all the TV episodes. It is okay to sometimes just drop things off at a good point and just walk away.
It's like how Game of Thrones, you just stop after season 6, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember that there's that one episode of Brooklyn Nine-Nine where Jake and Boyle are talking, and I forget what the context is, but Jake's like, Boyle, it's gonna be okay, and Boyle's just like, that's what you said about Die Hard 5.
But let's focus on the first 3 Die Hard movies. So I love the naming scheme of these movies.
Oh yeah, classic.
So we have Die Hard 2, Die Harder, which
is that real?
Yes,
okay.
that is legit what the movie title is. And
that's not the tagline, that's the actual title.
Yes, Die Hard 2, Die Harder.
Okay. No notes. No notes.
Yeah, the third movie is... Oh, sorry. The second movie, before I move on, is actually also based on Christmas Eve, but it takes place around an airport. It's a really cool setting for an action movie that hasn't really cropped up before. I'm not talking really on the planes. Like, it's really on the ground kind of setting at the airport.
You know what? I think I remember like 1 or 2 moments from that movie, and that's it.
See, I've watched all of these movies numerous times, so
Okay.
I'm a pretty big Die Hard fan.
Okay.
And I did it again. Zing!
All right.
The third movie in the series, Die Hard with a Vengeance.
That's
yes.
right. With Jeremy Irons.
Yes,
As
Jeremy Irons as the bad guy, Hans
Gruber's brother.
Yes.
That's right.
And we get Bruce Willis starring alongside Samuel Jackson for one of the best action duos in movies, period. I loved those two together in that movie.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. So, okay, Die Hard and Die Hard 2, Die Harder, take place on Christmas Eve, right? And after the first 2 movies, they dropped the pretense, and I think... Like, Die Hard 3 just takes place wherever, right? At some other time.
Yeah.
But there's a moment in the movie when, like, all the cops are busy with something. So this kid steals something from a store, and John McClane stops him. And the kid just shouts at him, like, "Hey, man, it's Christmas!" Meaning it metaphorically, meaning, like, it's open season. So for years, my sister and I had an argument where she's like, well, Die Hard 3 takes place on Christmas Eve. That kid said it was Christmas. I'm like, that's not what he meant.
Yeah.
And we just argued incessantly for years over that.
Yeah, it's a great movie. Like, I really enjoy that one. It's probably my second favorite of the series.
I barely remember the sequels, but I seem to remember the third one being, like, the second best.
Yeah, I really enjoy it, and it's partially because we have some really great new characters in the movie.
I mean, Jeremy Irons is fantastic and everything, right?
Yeah, exactly. The fourth movie is called Live Free or Die Hard, which is Bruce Willis and Justin Long together on, I believe it's the 4th of July, Independence Day. So they do kind of circle back at that point. It's the only movie of the series to not have an R rating. They toned down the swearing and the violence in it to try to appeal to more wider audience, to get teenagers to the movie theater to see it.
And you know what? I can't verify this for sure, but I'm pretty sure that's the first Die Hard movie I saw. And then I went back and my parents showed me the other ones.
I wouldn't be shocked because that one's kind of a more modern. I think it came out in like 2007. Don't quote me on that, but
so
around that time.
Would have been like 14.
Yeah.
So like if they were trying to attract teenagers, it worked.
Yeah, exactly. I definitely watched the first Die Hard first and then got the whole box set, I think, for my dad for Christmas. And then we got really into the Die Hard series at that point in time. When that movie came out was when we bought the box set.
And you know what? I think Live Free or Die Hard is a great entry to end the series on.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that's what they chose to do.
Yeah. Good Day to Die Hard is a film name for an idea for a fifth movie that may or may not have been made, and we don't need to talk about it any more than that.
Because it never happened.
Yeah, because I've never seen it and have no plans on watching a movie that doesn't exist.
That's correct. Why would you watch a movie that doesn't exist? Why would you do such a thing?
Although I have an extra bonus movie to watch in the Die Hard series, and that is the soft prequel to Die Hard, which is called The Detective, based on the original book,
That's right.
The Detective, that the author of Nothing Lasts Forever wrote.
That starred Frank Sinatra,
It
right?
did star Frank Sinatra. 1968. It's very different in tone. It's a neo-noir crime film. So other than basically the original ideas of the author and the connection there really isn't much other connection to Die Hard, although it probably is a good watch. Like, I'd be really interested in watching a Frank Sinatra performance because I've never seen a Frank Sinatra movie.
I don't think I could pick Frank Sinatra out of a crowd. Ring-a-ding-ding.
Nice. I probably couldn't either, to be honest, but I do have an idea of what Frank Sinatra looks like because I've seen him recently.
It would be...
Picture of him.
I don't know if we talked about this or not, but like this was originally supposed to be Die Hard was originally envisioned as a sequel to the Frank Sinatra movie, but
yes.
Frank Sinatra didn't want to do it, and like...
Because he was old at that point.
Old as balls, so...
Like, this movie came out 20 years after The Detective.
Right, so then they just said screw it, and then they made him John McClane.
And even in the book, he was he was an older action hero in the book, and
like
and,
a World War II veteran.
yeah, and they didn't like the idea of that in the book, and they decided to change that and change the portrayal. I guess what I should mention is all of the 3 sequels that exist of Die Hard are all actually related on unrelated pieces of fiction. Like there's a couple of books, and then I believe one like newspaper article that each of these were based off of. So they're all based on literary.
So they're all adaptations.
Yeah, they are all
of,
adaptations, which is
but
really neat.
That is interesting. They just imagine if like my book sells and then a studio comes to me like, we want to purchase your book, but we're gonna put Batman in it.
Yeah,
like,
or we're gonna workshop it into the Game of Thrones world.
Yeah, I'm like, what?
Yeah,
like, they're like, okay.
Yeah, it's possible.
That is
it
possible.
could happen. And then John McClane is running through everything.
Yeah.
Suddenly, old Indiana Jones shows up.
I'd just be sitting there in the theater with popcorn, like, I have no notes. It's fantastic.
I could have made it better myself.
Yeah. Why didn't I think of this? That is really interesting.
Yeah. All right. It's time to wrap things up with our personal review and the partner factor.
Okay.
I guess I'll start. This is my favorite Bruce Willis movie, without a doubt.
Absolutely.
It's my favorite Alan Rickman performance, without a doubt. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. It probably is in my top 10 movie list. I think if it's not the first place action movie of all time for me personally, it's definitely second. And it's probably tied, honestly, with my favorite Christmas movie. The other one being Christmas Vacation. So
It's Chevy Chase.
yeah, those are my 2 go-tos when I'm watching looking for a good Christmas movie around this time of year. Jess also watched this with me and said, yeah, that was great. I love Die Hard.
Was it her first time watching it?
No, I forced her to watch it once, probably 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay. I did not watch it with a partner. I watched it with my mother.
Yep.
But no, I had a great time. We both had a great time. Like, honestly, like, you know, I can usually find something to complain about with most movies, or at least a suggestion maybe, or something that rubbed me the wrong way. Actually, fun fact, I have one criticism of The Jerk.
Oh, I do too. So let's do the criticism part right now.
Okay, I'll go first.
Okay.
My one criticism, and it's not even a huge criticism, I wouldn't even necessarily take it out of the movie, but the fact that Naven is cheating on his biker girlfriend.
Did you say Naven?
Naven
Johnson?
Naven Johnson from The Jerk.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you
Wait, are we talking about Die Hard or are we talking about The Jerk?
I said I had one piece of criticism for The Jerk that I forgot to bring up.
Oh!
What did you think I was talking
I
about?
thought you were going to criticize Die Hard.
Oh.
And then I was like, wait a second, Naven Johnson makes an appearance in Die Hard? What? I must have missed that one.
Oh my god, I think Michael has a brain condition too.
He hates the cats!
Yeah. No, okay, what I said was I can normally think of something to complain about for most movies. Then I was like, oh, actually, I do have one criticism of The Jerk.
Go ahead.
My one criticism of The Jerk from last week is I think it might be a little out of character that Naven was cheating on his girlfriend, however briefly. Or it's like his biker lover lady. I wouldn't even necessarily change the script or take it out. It's just my one little nitpick.
Okay.
But now back to Die Hard. What I was saying is...
We're doing a Die Hard.
We're doing a Die Hard. All right, Steve Martin, you can get out. I'm putting Steve Martin back to one side. What I could say is... With most movies, I have something to complain about or something I don't like.
Right.
I'm always like, that movie was 5 minutes too long, or that movie was 20 minutes too long. I have no complaints about this movie. I think
pacing's perfect.
Yeah, no, like those things we mentioned that maybe don't age well or hold up as well. Like, I mean, I don't really have much to complain about with this movie.
Yeah. So my nitpick of the movie, and this is a really small nitpick, but we actually brought it up in another podcast episode, something similar that happened, and then I saw it in this movie, and I thought, I gotta bring it up because I noticed it in this one too.
Okay.
Is the final end piece sequence with, it's really down to Hans, Holly, John, and then there's the American terrorist robber guy who's also got the gun in that sequence. You know who I'm talking about?
The guy, the guy.
Yeah,
the last terrorist left.
Yeah,
Hans.
he was down in like pretending to be the receptionist. So when he gets shot right in the head, like point blank almost, and he screams after he gets shot. And that was actually something that Jason and I noticed back when we did the Soylent Green episode, and it was more blatant in that. Like, the woman gets shot and then sends out a blood-curdling scream after, like, half her head's been blown off. And I noticed it in this one, too, and went, I can't not see this anymore.
Is that impossible, though? Like, I don't think you die immediately if you get shot in the head.
I don't know.
You might have time to scream.
Maybe, but it was a nitpicky moment for me. But because I noticed it in another movie, I had to bring it up on this one, too.
That might just be a you criticism.
Maybe.
But
It's so small, too.
I see your point.
It's literally the only point of criticism I have. Otherwise, this is a perfect movie, in my opinion. Like I said, it's it's one of my top 10s.
Yeah.
It's one of the 20 movies or 50 movies in my top 10 movies.
I would say I'd probably put it in my top 20.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there any quotes or anything else that you want to end off with before we wrap her up?
Just, this is a really small moment, but like when the two FBI agents show up and it's a white guy and a black guy, it's like, it's Johnson and Johnson, no relation.
Yeah.
I don't know why that was so funny to me. Or later when they're flying the helicopter over the building and the white guy's like, it's just like goddamn Saigon. And the black guy's like, bro, I was in middle school when that happened.
Yeah. You know what? Actually, that's a great point. I wasn't going to bring this up, but because we're talking about this, the white Agent Johnson is somebody you might have seen before. And it's funny because out of all the times I've watched this movie, I've always thought I've seen that guy before and I can't remember where I've seen him. And he plays one of the Fratelli brothers in the Goonies, one of the bad guys. And I was like, and as soon as I read that, I was like, oh, why didn't I look that up earlier? This would have saved me so much confusion over the years.
Huh. I've never actually seen the Goonies.
What?
Yeah, never seen it.
How have you never seen
the Goonies? It's about kids looking for
God.
So a kid's looking for a pirate treasure, right? I think I just got kicked off this podcast.
Oh my God. Well, we're doing the Goonies at some point now, and probably in the near future. It's so good. It's such a classic.
Okay, well.
Oh my God. Goonies stick together, and you're not even a Goonie.
I never claimed to be.
Oh.
Okay.
Oh, my soul.
Okay.
You can't see the podcast, like us talking on the podcast, but you can feel my soul just being ripped out of my chest.
I gotta say, it's a welcome sight. It's exactly what I wanted to see today. Okay.
Come out to the coast. We'll get together. Have a few laughs.
Yeah.
Now I have a machine gun. Ho, ho, ho.
My favorite line in the movie might be John going like, "Should have heard your brother squeal when I broke his neck." Like, just for how like uncharacteristically vicious it was. All things being equal, though, I'd rather be in Philadelphia.
Cool. I think that's it for us then. So we'll wrap her up there. Gotta go see Die Hard if you've never seen it before. And coming up next on the episode, really excited to announce that since we're getting to the end of the year, we're doing our best of the podcast. So we're talking our favorite movies that we've watched this year, both the old movies that we've covered for the first time that we've seen either first or second viewing, or new movies that we've seen in the last year, first or second viewing. And there's quite a lot. Like, I've seen a lot of movies this year, and I'm excited to talk about some of them. Some of the new ones that we haven't really talked about on this podcast, as well as highlighting some of the films that we have talked about on this and that really blew me away in my first watch.
Yeah, definitely. I'm excited for that as well. I got to make my list.
Yeah, I'm still working on it as well. It's quite a process, actually. It's kind of fun making lists.
That's the accountant in you talking, but
yeah. That's exactly
I'll
it.
concede that point.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to having all three of us on the podcast together again.
Yeah,
reunited.
Definitely. Reunited, and it feels so good.
Yeah. All right, cool. I think that is it for us. So see you next time.
See you next time.
Next time on VCR.